Hi, and welcome back to another narration. I was planning on recording and releasing this video before New Year, but clearly life had other plans for me. I got sick, and I basically completely lost my voice. I still haven't fully recovered, but, well. Chapter 33, Death Trap. From above, first came the screams of a crowd in sheer panic and confusion, then the sound of unending gunshots fired. Wondering what all of that commotion was about, Scott launched into a sprint toward the basement stairs, closely followed by Chris, Nolan, and Braden. As soon as they reached the ground floor, the Alpha stopped dead in his tracks. "What the hell is that?" he asked. "What the hell is what?" Chris had barely finished his sentence when he began to understand what Scott had meant. A thunderous blare, resembling that of wood crashing under the power of brute force, speedily colliding with it. It seemed to be getting closer towards them, and at a fast pace. They quickly gathered that it was none other than the sound of wooden walls being brutally wrecked. The four of them turned to face the direction it was coming from, slowly taking some steps back and bracing themselves. Apparently they hadn't braced enough, because they didn't move an inch as the wall facing them was demolished into tiny chunks, sent flying all around. A huge mass darted through that open gash like a car at high speed and violently slammed into Braden, sending her into an aerial glide across the mansion. She eventually crashed onto the floor after traversing several feet of distance away from the point of impact. Scott watched as her body fell limp. They all did, but their attention was soon snatched away by the creature towering over her unconscious figure. It stood there, seemingly enjoying its latest accomplishment, a taunting look on its face, almost as if it relished the sight of their shocked expressions. "A long tail," stated Chris. "What did you call it?" asked Scott. "The woman I took to the hospital. That's how she called the scorpion men that attacked you," he clarified. "What the hell is it doing here?" Nolan wondered. "Well, isn't it clear? It wants a fight." Scott clenched his fists and assembled all the strength he could gather in his legs in order to pounce at the creature, before the scorpion tail menacingly hovering over Braden plunged downwards to stab her. "Good call, McCall." Scott's blood froze in his veins when that voice reached his ears. His eyes fluttered wildly around, earning him a crazed expression. "Scott, what's happening?" Chris asked him, concerned by his sudden change of behavior. Clearly, nobody but Scott could hear that voice from the reaction of the two men near him. Yet he couldn't bring himself to describe the waves of pain that hit his soul after realizing who was speaking to him. When his eyes finally landed on the creature, the voice immediately spoke again. "Don't worry, Scott. They only attack when I tell them to." Cue more frantic motions from Scott to find the owner of the voice, which again turned out to be in pure vain. "You don't remember me, Scott? All right. What if I said werewolves, kanimas? It's like a freaking Halloween party every full moon." "Why don't you come out and face me?" Scott shouted back at him. "Well, I am right here. I've been waiting for you, actually." The creature backed away from Braden, turned around, and proceeded to jump towards the front door. Scott took the hint, looked at Nolan, and said, "Nolan, I'm gonna need you to stay here with Braden." Him and Chris followed suit after the long tail through the door. They were so taken by what was happening inside the house that they didn't realize how much they had zoned out of the event right outside the mansion. If mayhem had a face, well, the long tails were wreaking havoc out there, taking both bullets and lives. It seemed so easy for them to tear through human flesh, as though it was nothing but a thin sheet of paper. One of the creatures sent an entire police car crashing onto a group of deputies close by. Unfortunately, too busy shooting away at another of those abominations. Screams of terror and pain, calls for help, and in the middle of all of that stood one man. One very unfazed-looking man. "Ah, you finally noticed me, Scott," he announced in a chilling kind of cheerful tone. Chapter 34. Demons Out. "They're here, and they have nogitsuné with them." Rosalie barged in on Lydia and Malia, winded by the distance she arduously forced her legs to travel after exiting the elevator. Who are you?" began Lydia before being swiftly cut off. "They have great timing," exclaimed Malia. She then turned towards Lydia in order to answer her questions. "That's Rosalie, one of our very good and helpful allies. And the nogitsuné is one of theirs." Lydia still struggled to pick her stance about Malia's calm demeanor. Sure, she was over 100 years old, and sure, she knew more about their enemy than all of their minds combined could gather, but surely even her could afford more facial expressions than the cold, counterfeit smile she was harboring. What had this apprentice done to her that caused her soul to be damaged to this level? The saddest part of it all was that he probably regarded her as one of his most prized masterpieces, the ultimate success story in his logs. Or perhaps there was no reason to fret, and it was pure confidence she was exhibiting. Lydia wrestled her own thoughts until she realized she was sinking much deeper than she needed to. The lights flickering certainly helped her with that task. She had all of the time to shed tears of sorrow for the stolen youth of the woman before her ages away, pouring her spirit into solving the issues of the present day seemed to promise a much more fruitful outcome then and there. The lights blinked again, and Lydia could swear she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. He was there, then he was not. She ran out of the room, ignoring Malia's calls for her. "Stiles? Stiles!" She half shouted, half whispered his name, almost like the words clogged her windpipes. She burst into his room, in a huff, making Noah leap out of his seat, his eyes flashing with concern. "Lydia, what's happening?" he asked as she got close enough to hold Stiles' hand. She sniffled before answering with a small voice. "The nogitsuné. He's back. He's back," she muttered, not taking her eyes off of her boyfriend. Upon hearing that information, the sheriff's mouth opened up slightly, then closed shut immediately after. Whatever he had to say seemed to have died in his throat. "What's going on?" Liam's inquiry grabbed their focus, but before anything could be said, the lights went off and remained off. "What the hell?" cursed Zelinsky. A tiny click near Lydia indicated that Noah had picked his weapon up from its holster. All three in the room abided by the voice inside their heads, murmuring at them to keep quiet. She had the time to hear what sounded like steady ticking noises, similar to the ones spiders make, accompanied by the cries of the air being sliced by a long and sharp blade. Liam's glowing eyes cut through the veil of unnatural darkness around them, and as soon as the golden hue flared, however, he sucked in a sharp breath and yelled, "Lydia, get down," before darting forward. She immediately ducked and threw her leg backwards. She thought she hit the jackpot when she felt a mass colliding with the bottom of her foot. She pushed it back with all the might and strength she could muster. The lights shone bright once more for Lydia to realize that the man, or the creature she just kicked, had barely stumbled a few inches backwards. Before Liam tackled it to the ground, Lydia identified the supernatural by virtue of the sword it brandished, the disturbing, nightmare-inducing mask it bore to cover its face, and the fancy all-black attire. Zelinsky fired 3 times at the Oni, but in vain. They all knew better. They were aware that in order to kill an Oni, one needed to use weapons fashioned out of pure silver, It lifted Liam from his collar and thrusted him against one of the walls. "Out of the way!" Mei Li stood at the door and shouted at Lydia, who didn't realize she'd moved in front of the Oni. Lydia obliged, in time to dodge the sword that shot right past her. Mei Li lifted her hands up into a defensive position, gathered all the air she could suck into her lungs, then let it all out in a loud, agonizing shriek. The scream, powered by her inhumane vocal cords, reached the creature at the same time as the sword she'd thrown beforehand. A yellow gleam manifested from the Oni's chest at the moment the blade stabbed through it. The demon imploded in a ground-shaking reverberation, and just like that, it was no more. Chapter 35. Surprise, surprise. "All healed?" asked Peter, as him and Malia sat on the ground, their backs pressed against the tree trunk. "Pretty much," she answered, and asked a question of her own. "Now what?" "I think the best thing to do is to avoid all confrontation with them," he suggested. "And for how long do you think we can keep that up?" Running away from the berserkers exhausted them to their cores. Their legs couldn't carry them anymore, so they settled for trying to even their breathing out in hopes of coming up with a plan during that process. Malia flashed her coyote eyes blue and thoroughly scanned the area surrounding them. Peter waited patiently for her response and asked as she reverted her eyes back to her human ones. "Saw anything?" "No, but we can't stay here for too long," she said. She paused for a moment and asked, "Ideas on where we are? Or what this could be?" "Not sure, but considering we should have reached the house by now, I'd say we were driving in a loop. Now, I don't know of any creature that could create time loops like that," he stated. "The sky is still pitch black," Malia said, looking up. "What are you getting at?" "If it was just a time loop, then wouldn't the sky look normal? Just looped?" The question stirred some cogitation in Peter's mind. If the sky isn't real, then maybe nothing else is. Maybe it's all an illusion. "Well, the accident and the berserkers were pretty real," she added. "We need to find a portal." "A portal?" "Some sort of doorway back to the real world. The way we see it under normal light. I don't know how to explain it," he tried. "So, an exit from the illusion. You got the point," he whined before getting up on his feet, making sure to look around himself. "Come on, we really gotta get out of here." She copied his actions and stood from her resting place. By then, their breathing had slowed back to their normal rates. They poured their efforts into keeping alert over any unfitting detail around, watchful of their own steps. They cemented in place when they heard another low and long growl. They just couldn't pinpoint its provenance. "Where's it coming from?" Malia asked as she looked around for the source. Peter took the time to do the same and come to terms with the answer he came up with. "Everywhere," he said, defeated. Meanwhile, and apparently in another universe, Alec walked close to a vending machine, deliberating his pick from the various choices available, when all of a sudden the lights went completely out, and he heard Liam's voice yell for Lydia to watch out. The lights came back on. Then what sounded like 3 gunshots came through the same direction, and Alec darted towards his friend to help in whatever way he could. As he turned around the corner, however, he was met with an unknown figure. Well, he'd never seen one in person, but he'd heard all about the story of the Oni. He distinctly remembered the part where one of them took the life of a member of the pack. That part stuck with him. It puffed in from thin air, tarnishing the once lit way with murky, opaque smokes of shadow. He had to think fast after that. The creature in front of him was ruthless. It wasted no time to brandish its poisonous sword and swing it at Alec one first time, in an attempt to decapitate him before he ducked promptly. He jumped back, head hunched forward, just in time to dodge the blade, falling short from disemboweling him. He knew the only way to really get rid of an Oni was through the use of silver. The question for him was, where the hell could he find any of it then and there? So, for that time being, he resorted to bending out of shape to evade any injury at their hands. He also knew that the cuts they made were nastier than mere ones. It pushed him towards the makeshift exit door that opened on the back side of the hospital. Alec rolled back on the ground again, avoiding a slashing in the nick of time. He got back on his feet and looked around himself to see he was in the empty lower level of the parking lot. It was time for him to hit back, just hard enough to allow him the time to get around. He needed to get back by his friend's side. They'd have the solution, surely. Better fight those things together rather than solo. He heard a second low and steady clicking sound behind him. His legs refused to further move back. He snapped around sharply to see a second Oni posted behind him, ready to attack. Only that time, Alec couldn't react accordingly and was lacerated enough to cause him to fall to the ground. The other enemy grabbed a sword with both hands and lifted it as high as he could manage above his head, ready to stab it with full force right into Alec's throat. The young wolf lied helpless on his back. He saw his life flash before him, unable to heal fast enough to take any action and save his own skin. A new loud gunshot blared and rumbled the silence of the night. The bullet flew right through the chest of the Oni that was preparing to execute Alec, giving sight to a bright yellow light from the wound. It shone brighter each second that passed, until it engulfed the creature entirely before the Oni went up into smithereens. Alec lifted his head off the ground, curious about the identity of his savior. He wasn't ready for the shock he was in for. All he could utter was the name of his hero. Daniel? Chapter 36. In enemy's clutches. Last time I checked, you three were not on the best of terms, said Derek to the three individuals that trapped him in the triangle shape that created standing around him. Well, yeah, Callie did slash my face and left me for dead in order to be with Annis, but that's all behind us now, retorted Jennifer. Is that so? Derek asked again. And she did kill me, so, added Callie from where she stood. Is there any use in asking you how you all somehow got back to life? Derek tried. I wouldn't see any problem as to why not. But I can't see why yes either. Jennifer harbored a malicious smile as she uttered those words. Derek knew what they were there for. At that point, he was just delaying the inevitable. Not only did he have to stand his ground against three enemies at once, but he was also in total darkness when it came to their abilities. He knew the old them for sure. But what if they were blessed with new powers since their resurrection? Annis kept his silence from the moment he showed his face. Callie didn't seem all that happy either. For people who were presumably there to take revenge, they did not appear to gloat the slightest bit. It all felt like layers on top of layers of strange. Nevertheless, Derek needed to brace himself from what was to come from them. Pleased to be there or not, they did show up for the job, so he couldn't let his guard down. So, shall we do this or not? Said Derek. Oh, you're in a rush, I see, said Jennifer tauntingly. She gave one of her mischievous smiles before her eyes darted from Derek to Annis then Callie. Who was going to make the first move? They quit all and any motion all of a sudden. For a brief while, they kept their activities to the minimum of breathing, anticipating. Well, it was fun while it lasted. It was Jennifer who threw the first punch. Well, a punch is mainly an expression. She lifted her arm up in front of herself suddenly, pushing the air forward with her open palm. Her eyes had entirely shifted to a white color as she did that. Derek felt like his body was yanked backward as a strong breeze emanated from her open hand. His feet detached from the ground and he was flung against something metallic, judging by the sound it made at the collision a few feet away behind him. He found no time to identify the machinery, however. Then again, what was the use? "What are you two waiting for? An invitation?" She spouted in Callie's and Anna's direction. They seemed reluctant, and she didn't like that. Both of them glared at her before turning Derek's way and heading towards him. "Where did he go?" Anna asked as they halted in their tracks when they saw that Derek had vanished from the spot he had fallen at. "You're both alpha werewolves. Don't act like you can't find him," she said. "Hear that, Derek? I know you're here. I know you're hiding, but you can't hide forever," she taunted. Her words gave him a sour taste, even though he knew she was right. There weren't enough machines for him to endlessly hide behind, not much to keep them at bay for long. He needed a plan. He needed it fast. At the same time, at Icon House, he was wrong indeed. Seeing his own end had 1,000 ways of being more painful than predicting that of others. At least those were the thoughts of Parrish as he sat trapped within a cube made out of 6 walls. Upon contact, they seemed very solid and very real. Was there really no hope for him? "Why didn't you come sooner?" Sanders's voice blared in Jordan's mind, like in an echo chamber. He flipped himself around to see him. No. Whatever that was, it only had the appearance of Sanders, as well as his voice, before what happened to him in that place. "You could have saved us, Jordan." Another voice boomed. This time it was his other colleague, Vince, who stood to his other side. But once again, Parrish knew it wasn't real. "You really are good for nothing." Fisher's remark made him cover his 2 ears with his hands. He pressed on them as hard as he could, hoping he could lock their voices out of his head. In vain, of course. He opened his eyes back to see that his 3 unalive colleagues had surrounded him, their backs against the walls of a concrete cubicle he was trapped inside of. Parrish slowly crouched down and hid his face behind his palms, and moved his fingers through his hair, sighed, but not in relief. He wondered about Lydia. What was she doing then? He also wondered why she was the one in his mind right then.